Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's exactly the time planned, so I have the habit to start then. Maybe some people coming in, but we are rather squeezed in time. Welcome to this panel on the issue of a job guarantee. You know that we have an aim in the European Union formulated in the Europe 2020 strategy to go for 75% of employment. In this frame, it's also striking that at the moment there's a lot of youth unemployment, and sometimes you see the idea that a job guarantee could help. Proponents of the job guarantee claim that it is not economically cost efficient to maintain large stocks of unemployed or underemployed people in benefits. Instead, they argue that it should be offered a job, mostly then a public sector job comes up, at minimum wage or equivalent to unemployment benefit. It should be noted that whilst related to the concept of a youth issue, the job guarantee is different from a purely job guarantee. Youth guarantee would mean that all young people would be either in a job or in education in order not to get simply disconnected from the whole society, and the job guarantee really only looks at having a job. We've produced an issues paper, and in that issues paper there were a few questions central. I'm not going to read them out all integrally, but the main gist of it is that we ask ourselves what are the main obstacles in Europe to the implementation of job guarantees or similar schemes as instruments of genuinely macroeconomic significance, addressing the unemployment crisis and improving the society's well-being. Could these obstacles be overcome? That was the first question. And the second one is, in what areas could or should public jobs be developed for unemployed young people in economically and socially cost-effective ways? And the third question was, how long should it take before an unemployed person is given a public sector job? How long should such a job last for? Would retaining or upskilling not be a preferable investment to such a job? We have three eminent speakers invited for this panel. And I hope that altogether they will leave some time for discussion when they are ready. But we are here to listen to their input. First, Professor Bill Mitchell, who is from the University of Newcastle in Australia and holds the research chair in economics, is the director of the Center for Full Employment and Equity. Nice acronym, COFFEE. An official research center at the University of Newcastle in Australia, and also visiting professor at the Maastricht University. He has published widely in refereed academic journals and books, and has an established record in macroeconomics, labor market studies, econometric modeling, regional economics, and economic development. His latest book, Full Employment Abandoned, focused on how current economic policies have undermined the principles of full employment and disadvantaged low-pay workers. He has also developed a concept of job guarantee as a buffer stock employment approach to full employment and price stability, in preference to using unemployment to discipline the inflation process. I hope that after this introduction you still have something to say now to us, Professor. Please, the floor is yours.
I'm the only Australian here. I travel a long way. I'm probably one of the few native English speakers here from the look of it, and I'll probably be the most difficult to understand of all the native English speakers, but I'll speak more slowly than I would typically speak so that I give you a chance to get 50% of it. There's a lot of background. I've spent a lot of my academic life developing these concepts, so it's hard to distill that experience and the theoretical knowledge that underpins this concept in a short talk. So, because there's a lot of macroeconomics that go with it, which is essential to understand so that you don't just dismiss the idea outright. So what I'm assuming today, I've been a critic of the Eurozone since its inception, and the major criticism was the lack of a federal fiscal capacity. And I know that was a policy choice, and I think it was an ideological choice that is now backfired. But I'm assuming that in the debates that are to come and the innovations that the leaders of the European economies come up with, there will be some sort of functional fiscal capacity. Because my judgment is without it, the Eurozone will die. And I think as part of that federal fiscal capacity, which I'm assuming everything else I say assumes that will be the case, in other words, that you'll have a function the same as the Australian government has to address asymmetrical aggregate demand shocks across the regional space, same as the American government has, same as Japan and all the rest of the fiat currency issuing national states. You'll have to innovate that, or as I say, the Eurozone will just continue to degenerate. I noted this morning that Mr. Schultz said that the idea of public sector job creation isn't far-fetched. And I thought that was good because if we reflect back on events last week, in 1969, in July, we landed a person on the moon. And that was 43 years ago. We had the technology and the innovation and the skills to solve an extremely complex event in physics, in geography and the rest of it, and we landed someone on the moon. That person died, of course, last week. And it reminds us of the great innovativeness of human endeavour. And so it can't be too difficult then, if we can do that, to create some jobs and to stop people languishing in the worst state that an economy can deliver anyone. Now, the first thing I'd like to bring out very clearly is, as an economist, I'm trained, and I'm sure many people in this room have degrees, if not higher degrees, in economics, and we're trained very rigorously in expunging inefficiencies from the system. All of our models are based upon a presumption that efficiency is best. Efficiency of resource usage is best. And when we study microeconomics, we learn about Harburger triangles, inefficiencies due to various market imperfections. And when we study macroeconomics, we learn about open gaps, which are driven by mass unemployment. And the Nobel Prize winner James Tobin once said at a meeting, how many Harburger triangles can you fit into one open gap? How many microeconomic inefficiencies can you fit into one macro inefficiency? And the answer was lots. And the point about it is that I find my profession is very inconsistent in this issue. They worry about deregulation and liberalisation and all the minutiae of microeconomic markets. Yet staring them in the face is several countries in Europe with teenage youth, because you define youth differently to us, youth, 50% or more unemployed. Been that way for several years. Probably won't get a job before they're adults. The greatest inefficiency is mass unemployment is unemployment. That's the greatest inefficiency. That's the greatest daily loss of income of any of the inefficiencies. They're gone forever, that income loss. And that's if we just take a really narrow economics concern. If we broaden that and consider the social concerns and the intergenerational concerns and the increased alcohol and substance abuse, the ill health that occurs, the family breakup, the drains on the criminal justice system, and all of the other pathologies that accompany unemployment, the losses are fantastically large and outweigh any of the normal losses that my profession are obsessed about. And so that has motivated my work, that if I'm really going to be serious about efficiency the first thing I've got to do work about and solve as an economist is mass unemployment. It's just crazy that you would allow your economies, and we allow our economies, to have millions and millions of people not realising their potential and generating income that will benefit all of us, as well as all of the personal benefits that those particular people get from going into work. It's crazy to focus on liberalisation and deregulation when you've got that great big elephant in the room killing all of our economies. The second thing that I want to say is that whichever way you want to go, a monetary system will run some sort of buffer stock to maintain price stability. A buffer stock goes up and down in a cyclical way, and you can have one of two choices. You can either run an unemployment buffer stock, where you use unemployment as a policy tool to discipline the competing claims on national income, in other words, the inflation process. And so when there's pressures in the economy, you have to increase that pool of unemployed. And when there's that pool can get very large, which it is now. Or you can run, as an alternative, an employment buffer stock. And this is the basis of a job guarantee. Now, I came on this idea in my fourth year at Melbourne University, and I was studying agricultural economics. And Australia at the time had a wool price stabilisation scheme, where the farming lobby, like here, is very powerful, and convinced the government to stabilise their incomes so that when the wool crop was very strong and would have driven down the wool price, the government came in and bought all the wool up to stabilise the price and therefore deliver the income security. And we had wool stores, great big buildings all around the cities, piled up with wool as a buffer stock. And of course, when the crop wasn't so good and the supply was down, the government would sell it back out into the market to stabilise the price out of the wool stores. And I wasn't so much interested in wool when I was studying agricultural economics, but I decided this was full employment of wool. And that I was very interested in unemployment because it was in the late 1970s, and that time after the OPEC oil crisis, all of the sort of advanced economies, including Australia, started to see the rise in unemployment, mass unemployment in our countries. And I thought, well, look, if the government can buy wool and store it and release it when there's a increased private demand for wool, they can certainly buy up all the labour that nobody wants to use, that has a zero opportunity cost because it's not being demanded by the market. They could certainly buy it at some fixed price, stabilise the price that way, and when the private market was buoyant again, all that would happen would be the market would buy the labour back. And so you'd run a buffer stock of jobs. And my argument is that that is a superior buffer stock approach when compared with the alternative of maintaining huge pools, millions of people unemployed, as a counter-stabilisation strategy. And when I think about all of the analysis and the evaluations of what we've been doing since 1994 job study, the OECD job study became the sort of defining policy framework for labour market policy, all of those policies, by and large, we can conclude, have largely failed. They've divorced the supply side from the demand side. They've believed that human capital augmentation and skill development could be effective outside of the paid work environment. And most of the credible research says that training and supply-side activation only works, and I heard people this morning saying that, only works when it's within a paid work environment where you've got a strong demand side and you can make those structural transitions much more easily. You can't do it when you've got mass unemployment and no jobs. You can't activate people to be more efficient in job search when there aren't any jobs to search for. An unemployed person can't search for jobs that aren't there. So what is a job guarantee? Very briefly, if you're interested in very great detail, then I've written thousands, if not millions of words on this over my career. Basically, government creates what an economist would call a perfectly elastic demand curve for labour at a fixed wage. What that means to non-economists is that the government guarantees a job to anybody who can't find another job. It fixes a job at a socially acceptable minimum wage, and not a minimum wage that's a miserable, poverty-inducing minimum wage, but one that fairly allows a unskilled worker to participate in a non-alienating way, in an inclusive way in their society. And that should be fixed at the bottom of the private sector wage structure, which raises questions which we've dealt with, say, in South Africa. What happens if the socially acceptable minimum wage is above the lowest private sector wage? Well, there's a big debate about that. And my argument to the South African government was, you don't want those private sector firms that are paying poverty minimum wages in your economy. And so you can use a job guarantee minimum wage to create dynamic efficiencies in the private sector, because the private sector wouldn't get the labour if they weren't innovating in their organisation, in their capital investment to make sure they could generate the higher wages with higher productivity. It's a win-win that way. The minimum wage is fixed. It's not market varying. It's adjusted over time in concept by some sort of productivity augmentation, but it's fixed because it's got to become the nominal anchor in the economy. A buffer stock has to have some sort of anchor to be an inflation deterrent. And so you should see the job guarantee concept that I've developed and my colleagues have developed with me as being a macro stability package rather than just a job creation package. It is a job creation package. It creates what I call loose full employment. It's loose because the government is hiring off the bottom. It's not competing for labour in the marketplace by bidding at market wages. It's hiring labour at a fixed price that the private market doesn't want. So it's buying off the bottom, and that can't be inflationary. And of course, if the private markets become too heated, what do we do now? We run restrictive macro policy, and we create unemployment as a way of disciplining the price process. Well, all the job guarantee does is shift workers by running restrictive policy. If there's an inflation threat, then the job guarantee transfers workers into the job guarantee pool, buying at a fixed price. That's the inflation control mechanism. There's all debates about whether you run it with other social transfer schemes like unemployment benefits. That's optional. I prefer not to have an unemployment benefit. I think the government's got a responsibility for employment guarantee, not income guarantee. And I think that it's counterproductive to offer an unemployment benefit if you're going to offer somebody a job. But there's all debates about that, and they're peripheral in a way. Type of jobs. I reject this notion always that some jobs are good and some are bad, and that division is broadly private sector good, public sector bad. We've heard this idea of boondoggling, all of these put-down terms for public sector job creation. And I think back to the big public works projects that historically have been brought in at times of crisis, say in the New Deal and the Great Depression. And in Australia, for example, we carved out a road called the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. The workers on the public works programs drilled it out of a cliff. Now, that created hundreds and if not thousands of jobs at the time when they were dramatically needed. Well, that was 80 years ago. What have we got now? We've got a multi-million-dollar tourist resource, where along that road now is tourism, hotels and camping grounds that attract international visitors every day. That sounded like a very productive outcome. If you go to Yosemite National Park, that was built by make-work schemes, by these sort of public works programs. If you go to South Africa now, the public works program down there is creating public infrastructure that the apartheid system refused to create. Basic drainage, basic sewerage, which is stopping the normal infections that occur when you don't have those things, like cholera and things like that. That sounds very productive to me. And as I say, if we can put a person on the moon 43 years ago, then we can create imaginative jobs that are going to meet unmet community and environmental care needs that the private sector will never supply through a market process. And we've done lots of research on this. We've done national surveys. We've done them in America, in here, in Argentina, and we've got hundreds of thousands of jobs identified. There's no shortage of productive jobs. There's just a shortage of funding to create them. The introduction said that the job guarantee didn't have any training involved, and it's not a criticism, but I see the job guarantee as a way of integrating training ladders with paid work environment, with income security. And you can organise job guarantee structures to ensure that workers are, if they want to, getting skill development to take them beyond where they might end if they didn't do that skill development. But in the meantime, they're secure at a basic level, but they're still secure. They're better off than they are unemployed. Now, some workers might choose not to take any training. Well, fine. And I've been criticised by federal ministers in Australia of saying, well, you know, what happens if the workers enjoy their job guarantee job? And I say, well, that sounds good to me. What happens if a few of the most disadvantaged citizens actually like going to work? Well, that sounds like a win-win again to me. I don't see that there's a problem of some workers wanting to stay in the job guarantee forever. The other big argument is, what about the substitutability with private sector work? That's often raised about with respect to public work schemes. Well, you know, that's again a lack of imagination. The sort of surveys that we've done, where we've gone into local areas, have identified jobs that will never be done by the private sector because the market won't deliver profit to them. But then you ask yourself and ask the local communities, would these jobs create unmet need that will enhance the value of the community, not the private firm, the community? And the answer is typically yes. There is a plethora of environmental care needs to fix up the destruction that's occurred over the since industrialisation, that the private sector will never make profits out of, but will deliver the citizens and the society value. So I don't see that there's the sort of substitutability problems. That's a matter of design, operational design. I know that the European Commission is concerned about operational matters, and the way I look at it is that what we broadly now know as the neoliberal period, this idea that markets, self-regulating markets, would deliver optimal wealth, that sort of era that we're living through now. That era created a new industry. All the other industries, agriculture, manufacturing and retailing and wholesaling, they're still there, but they created a new industry. They created an industry called unemployment. And that industry has created a whole proliferation of managers to manage the unemployed, bureaucracies and private sector employment services and private sector training services. There's a whole litany of organisational structures that manage the unemployed, for God's sake. And if we can't convert that human energy and that human resource into managing a few jobs, then how did we ever get to the moon in 1969? And the answer is that those who say it's impossible to organise are just never going to accept the idea on ideological grounds. Let me tell you about Argentina for about a second. And in December 2001, if you're aware of what happened there were riots in the street, the banks shut down, their export markets collapsed, they had to default on their external loans, they dropped the peg with the US dollar, there was total chaos. And fortunately, the senior advisor to the employment minister had heard myself and some colleagues talking in Chicago sometime earlier than that about this stuff. And they brought in what's called the Head of Households program, where they guaranteed a certain number of hours for one member of each household. And it was funded at the federal level and delivered at the local level, because local communities know best what they need in their communities. And a whole range of jobs emerged. And let me tell you that in 2 quarters, that's 6 months, around about 650,000 head of household jobs sprung up. And that created a buffer for domestic demand, because these workers who would have been on the scrap heap had income now. It created all sorts of innovative things in the local communities in terms of personal care services, retailing, little public works programs, water fixing up, all these sorts of really value-adding projects to citizens. And not long after that, once the economy started to recover on the back of domestic demand, what happened? The Head of Households program started to shrink very dramatically. Well, where did the workers go? They went back into the private sector. And so if you're telling me that you can't organise a job guarantee program and get hundreds of thousands of workers into it really quickly, well then you're very wrong, because it's happened. India now has millions of workers in its rural job guarantee program, which was designed to provide income security for rural citizens to stop them flooding into cities as the cities started to urbanise and offer industrial work, because the cities didn't have the infrastructure to cope with it. And now they're getting all these nice projects out in the rural areas. Now, it's not a perfect system, but it's much better than what they had. So, in closing, a job guarantee isn't a panacea to the problem. It's the first thing a national government or a federal agency within a Eurozone should introduce. It's difficult to be perfect, but nothing's perfect. But it's better than what you've got now, because the intergenerational consequences of the Greek youth being unemployed, the Spanish youth being unemployed, and as one of the speakers said this morning, it's spreading up north. The intergenerational consequences of that are unknown, but they're highly destructive, and we don't want to know what it's going to be like in 15 years, where those young people will have never worked. And one of the great productivity augmentations of a job guarantee scheme is that the children see the parents go out each day to work. That's almost priceless in itself. So I'll close there. Thank you very much.